Hello!
Hi.
I'm told that I just have to talk loud and that I only have 4 hours, so I thought I'd get this started. Elizabeth is closing the door. My name is John Larson. I'm a high school language arts teacher from Hermiston, and I'm currently on leave of absence to serve as the president of the Oregon Education Association. We were thrilled to come and talk to you about the Red for Ed movement all across this nation. I started teaching in Oregon in 1990, and my first political campaign was anti-Measure 5. And we were told at that time that Measure 5 was going to decimate education in Oregon and that we would be disenfranchising students if this passed. And then my entire career after it passed has been doing just that. And generations of students have passed through our schools without the proper funding necessary to make sure they have the schools they deserve. That all changed after years of work by all kinds of different groups, but I'm the most proud of the work that educators have done. Whether it has been phone campaigns, Measure 66 and 67, Measure 97, educators across this state have stepped up to say, we need to make sure we invest in our future. We need to make sure that our students have what they need to be successful. And last May, we saw the final results of that. We saw 25,000 members or people show up in Portland, and more than 40,000 people across the state in communities as tiny as Union, Oregon, saying we have got to fund our schools. And so this amazing panel that you're going to be hearing from right now are some of the educators who were at all of these rallies and helped with all of these demonstrations, and are here to talk to you a little bit about what the Student Success Act means for us. And I guarantee you, in 3 years, we're going to be back and we're going to be talking to you about what we need next. And so I will turn it over to this amazing panel of women. Laura, you're going to be the first one.
That's right. Thanks, John. Well, it was my privilege to work as one of the architects of this group of students.
Please use the mic.
Oh, okay, so sorry. It should be on now.
Thank you.
Small enough room, but I don't have his booming voice. Thanks for the reminder. It was my privilege to work for OEA for the last 23 years on school funding as one of my chief duties on my playbook. And I was never prouder than when we were able to win passage of this. I was one of the architects of especially the portion of the act that's known as the Student Investment Account. And I'm going to go over a little bit about what it is and how we got there as a backdrop, and then I'm going to turn it over to the rest of our members on this panel to tell you a little bit about what their students experience now and how this act, when it's fully implemented, will impact their lives. So by the numbers, what happened in 2018 is that the presiding officers of both chambers decided to compose what is called the Joint Committee on Student Success. It was a bicameral, bipartisan, very large group of legislators who traveled the state over 2,700 miles, 77 different sites in 14 different school districts. They talked to students and parents and education professionals, with both classified and licensed. They talked with business leaders, they talked with higher ed folk, they talked with a wide range of community members who understood that our public school system held a lot of promise that it wasn't able to meet because of all the challenges of chronic underfunding for 3 decades. So after spending all of that time on the road, hearing that testimony around the country, around the state, they came back into the 2019 session with about $4 billion worth of ambition. And with that $4 billion worth of ambition came the realization that that was probably more money than they could raise for in any given legislative session. And as probably most of you know, in Oregon, we have a constitutional requirement that 3/5 of each chamber of the legislature must vote in favor of a tax plan in order to have it pass. So 3/5 majority of each chamber, and then it's subject to a 90-day wait period where any citizen can challenge the enactment and do a referendum to overturn it. So there are a lot of systemic hurdles to getting new revenue, and it's part of the reason it's taken so long. But let's talk a little bit about what's in this. First of all, we were simultaneously fighting to make sure that our base funding, the state school fund, which is 10/11ths of the total funding in a biennium for our 197 school districts and 17 ESDs, that base budget was adequate. And that was a fight and a slog all in itself. Bob knows, he was there with OSEA helping carrying the flag. We really had to work hard just to get it up to the $9 billion level, which was a current service level budget from our perspective. That is what it costs to do the same thing we're doing today, tomorrow, controlling for inflation, enrollment growth, and so on. So we got that base budget, and then we were simultaneously working on a variety of other pieces, including 3427 and its funding companion 5047, which is the Student Success Act. All told, we will have for K-12, we will come within 94% of the quality education model, which is the model that determines adequacy for the state school, for the public school system K-12. And when I say adequacy, I mean what it would cost to bring 90% of our students across the finish line to graduation by modeling it with prototype schools and figuring out down to the pencil and book what it costs to deliver. And that model is updated by the Quality Education Commission, which John sits on, every 2 years, so that it accounts for new innovations or new needs. And so, as you can see from the blue line, that's what the Quality Education Model recommendation for adequate has been over time, and the red line is our actual funding. So, yay us! Look at that. The highest watermark I've ever seen in my career up until now is 82%. So, what's in the Student Success Act? Well, it's a package of 3 big buckets. Early learning, because that pre-K investment level is critical to long-term success for kids, to make them success ready. Then there's the student investment account, that's 50% of the money, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. And then there are a number of statewide investments which just make it more possible to do all the things that kids need. So let's talk a little bit about some of the pieces of it. We've got, one of the pieces we did is we made sure that while the money is pushed out through the same funding formula that the state school fund, the base budget, gets, which accounts for the higher costs of students on an IEP for special education, English language learners, poverty, a number of other things that they call weights. That formula was replicated in the distribution of the student success funds as well, but we double weighted for poverty because we know that the #1 indicator of student outcomes is family SES. So we also made sure that we were able to feed more kids. It's really hard to educate a kid who's hungry, homeless, and hurting. We also made sure that we took care of our students who had significant disabilities. Those are students whose annual costs of education exceed $30,000 a year. We have insufficiently funded that program to provide those resources to school districts in the past, and we doubled that. We also made sure that the focus of the entire Student Success Act was really meaningfully based in equity. And when I say equity, I mean for all kinds of groups of students who traditionally experience disparities, whether it's navigating poverty, whether it's race and ethnicity issues, whether it's their disability, their language learning status, foster kids, and so on. And then finally, we made sure that we implemented all the recommendations of the Student Safety Task Force that had met in the interim. We've got a member of that task force in the room over there, Karen, thank you for your work. And all of those recommendations are embedded in the Act too. And that includes things like a tip line, when a student is suicidal, for example, that other kids can call when they've had a disclosure. And that's already, we know already, that's saved lives. So here another piece, a couple pieces of it that are important to know about it. Though it is a grant program, rather than just a flat distribution to everybody, no questions asked, no strings attached, it is a nice balance of flexibility and accountability. Flexibility and a sense of, these are the things we want these investments to achieve for our kids. And it's non-competitive. You don't have to have a grant writer if you have a school district of 200 kids. You are going to get your fair share of money as through the formula, as long as you are basing it on the rules of how to go about that process. And so we believe that with technical support from the district, clean and fairly uncomplicated rules, and a lot of promise involved in terms of the money being available year after year, this is not a one-off, that we will be able to do a lot for our kids. So as I said, the three main buckets, this is how it's distributed. 20% of that $2 billion of biennium will go to the early learning programs, and that includes things like relief nurseries, early pre-K, a brand new culturally specific preschool program, and a number of other early learning initiatives, more slots for early Head Start and so on. The student investment account, the 50% of the pot that I just described going out through the grants, and then finally the statewide education fund. Here are a couple case studies that give you a little imagination of what it might look like. Right now, we are in the process of having districts meet with their communities, engage with them, figure out with educators, with students and their parents from those groups of students who've experienced disparities, what it is that they need and what kind of improvements that they envision. So this is Salem Kaiser's dream when we were working on the Student Success Act. That gives you an idea what their roughly $70 million resource could buy. And you know, this is really heavy duty stuff. We have issues in our schools having to do with poverty, social determinants of health that lead students into a significant trauma situation, a lot of disruptions of their learning, and Salem is really leading the way in terms of trying to figure out how best to do that with their resources. Another case study. My favorite part of the Student Success Act is not what it'll do academically, but what it'll do for kids who don't have enough food to eat. Right now, we are more than doubling the monies for the Community Eligibility Program. That's a federal food program that enables schools in high poverty areas to feed all kids, universal access. No stigma, no forms, they just eat breakfast and lunch at school. We're better than doubling the number of schools. Well over 500 will get it under this program now. And for those that are more economically diverse schools, where the students do apply to be eligible for breakfast and lunch, we have significantly increased the number of dollars that we're spending because we're filling the gap between what the feds provide and what we will now provide, because we're raising the eligibility from 185% of the federal poverty level up to 300%. Because poor is poor, and 52% of our kids are poor. So I'm very proud of the fact that we are now leading the nation, the #1 state in the nation for feeding our hungry children. How are we paying for it? Well, we worked very carefully with a lot of allies, both in business and labor, to try to craft a proposal that if everyone didn't love, they could at least live with. And I think the proof is in the pudding because we did not get that referendum we feared. And what that corporate activities tax does, it's a brand new tax. My favorite three things about it is that it's stable, you can't evade it, and it's kicker proof. It doesn't ever go into the general fund. So we aren't going to have the peaks and valleys that we have with the general fund that go along with the recessionary cycles. We started with an exemption of $1 million. So we have over 400,000 businesses that do business in Oregon, both C Corps and S Corps, and fewer than 10% of them will probably pay this tax. And so their first $1 million is exempted. We exempt groceries, fuels, and hospitals. We then give them a chance to exempt another 35% of their gross receipts that they might spend on either business inputs or on labor. So by the time you whittle all that down, the difference is what they pay at 0.5%. So it's enough money to do what we are dreaming of doing with the Student Success Act, but it's not so much that it's a burden. So, a little bit about it. By the numbers, once again, this is from the department. $2 billion of investment per biennium or more. 12 new programs are created in the Act. It's a 40-page bill. I urge you to read it. It's just fascinating. Come on, this is a geeky crowd. You'll love it. 16 programs that have existed in some form or fashion but have been expanded to meet need. And then, of course, meaningful accountability, not overheated accountability, the right size of accountability in a way that helps to make sure that districts do what its architects envisioned, which is to make sure that they're dialoguing with their community, dialoguing with parents and with school employees, and making sure that the plans meet the needs of kids. It's another way of looking at the whole thing. It's hard to see from here, but I have packets for you over there with all kinds of great stuff, all kinds of geeky articles about education policy, but in it includes the PowerPoint slides and also an article that was in our OEA magazine, and you'll have a bigger version of this to look at yourself, but you can see the 3 accounts: early learning, student investment, and the statewide account. And then in the student investment account, there are 4 buckets. These are the 4 different areas in which those investments can go. One is class size or caseload buy-down. How many people have heard about high class sizes in our schools? Yeah, biology classes with 60 kids in them, not so good. Well-rounded education is the second one, and that is a very big and very flexible bucket. It can be more art, music, PE, bring back our licensed librarians who've been devastated over the last 2 recessions. We had over 800, now we're down to 127, statewide, 127. They're now having parent volunteers in a book room and calling it a library. That is not helping with literacy. So well-rounded includes that as well, and CTE programs, whatever. The third bucket is student health and safety. And we'll talk more about that. We've got one of our panelists who'll give you a lot more information about what's going on with our kiddos in schools. Whether it's the little kids who are fleeing the classroom because they are called runners, they're so under stress that they can't manage to pay attention in the classroom and self-regulate, or whether it's kids who are having violent outbursts because they are even more distressed, or whether we're talking about the other end of the spectrum, either the chronic absentee middle grades, or the kids in high school who give up and drop out, or who become suicidal. The second leading cause of death of adolescents in the state of Oregon is suicide. So we have a huge mental health problem in Oregon in general, but it's reflecting in our schools. And so that's a place where we're expecting a lot of resources to go. And then finally, more time. Some people call for a longer school year. Well, a longer school year, if all you're doing is more of the same, is not necessarily improving public education. But there are things that a lot of school districts might choose to do. A lot of districts that are on a 4-day week, they might go back to a 5-day week. Or they might lengthen the school day so that they have more options and opportunities, electives in the middle school, or what have you, more PE opportunities, etc. So time described flexibly is another way you can spend money. And then in the statewide account, we have a range of small grants for youth re-engagement, for dealing with kids who are on the verge of dropping out, while we have another big focus on equity there in terms of our 3 student success organizations. 2 had previously existed and 1 is new. So we have the African American Black Student Success Plan. That's a group I've been on since we created it in 2015. We have a brand new Latinx Student Success Plan, and then we have a Native American Alaska Native Success Plan that existed but never had funding. So all 3 of those will be continuously funded from here on out to work on letting small grants for those wraparound kinds of services that kids need. And then a number of other smaller programs, including some ESD support. Our education service districts are our regional education providers, and they have a $24 million pot to split that they will use to help their component school districts develop their plans and implement them. So the 2 stated purposes for that big pot of money, the student investment account, that's 50% of the funds, need to do 2 things. 1, the mental health and behavioral health issues that I alluded to, and 2, work closely to focus on those academic disparities, academic achievement for students who have academic disparities because of their status in one of these groups. And here's an example of who our students are. The this is for the 2017-18 student demographics. And by 2025, I think it is, we will be a minority majority state. In 1958, the year of my birth, we had 4% of our students were students of color. This year, we have 14% of our students who are students of color. So we are growing in that way, and we need to make sure that our education policies reflect the best practices for ensuring that we serve all kids well. So the mechanics of this, I won't go into a lot of detail. You'll have it in your packets if you're interested, but just know that districts are on the hook to make sure that they have community engagement meetings, surveys, whatever they can to authentically engage with students, parents, community members, and educators. And then they develop their needs assessment and their continuous improvement plan that has to be in no later than December 6th to the Department of Education. And then early in 2020, January, February, March, they will build their plans of how they will use their share of the money, which pencils out to about, in this first year of grants, about $650 a student. There's also an intensive program. There are a few districts that have very high poverty and extremely challenging times with all of their kids over time chronically. And so we've developed a special set-aside fund of extra resources and also some technical support with student success teams that will come out of experts out of the Department of Education to help those districts figure out new and creative ways to help those students get across the finish line as well. So we are here at the needs assessment SIP part. Then also the department has to create 24 new regulations just to manage this program, hire 70 staff. This is a major undertaking. This is huge. We've never had anything like this in education. But we'll have an application, and by the summer of 2020, those monies will start flowing to districts. We hope that that would give you all, and all of Oregon, the schools our students deserve. So with that, I'll turn it over to Celine to take it from here. Thanks, Laura. Yeah.
Hi, so my name is Celine Buchek, and I began my career in education in 1998. Prior to that, I worked as a mental health counselor in community mental health. So my job was part-time, and I first worked as a child development specialist in an elementary school. And it was that first year that my school started to lose programs. Music, art, and after-school programs got cut. And then the eventual discontinuation of summer school programs. And then eventually my position got downsized. So I began working in special education as a teacher. And in those years, it was 2005 when I started that, there was still a team of educational assistants in the special ed classrooms that were full-time positions with benefits. This meant that special ed students had consistent teams of teachers and assistants that were there to assist their learning. Then over the years, special ed programs' caseloads increased, and the districts went to cutting these special ed classified positions to part-time, 3.75 hours a day. And the classrooms for special ed budgets were pretty much non-existent. So, what can I do? I became a grant writer. I started to bring in revenue to my program and my classroom because my kids needed it and I needed it to be a good teacher. So my students started recycling bottles and cans. They did their part for the classroom budget. But over the years I realized grants are not sustainable either. And I was getting tired of writing. So it didn't solve the big issue or lack of revenue or cut programs or increase in class sizes. So what could I do? I was at a crossroads. I either leave teaching, something that I loved, or I fight. I knew I'd have tears. It's very personal. So I became much more active in my teachers union, believing that it was possible to bring sustainable funding for schools. It was time to step out of my classroom and become political, become vocal and visible. That's something that teachers don't do very easily. And there's a little mantra that I developed over the years that I used it with myself, I used it with everybody else that I was trying to engage into this work, is that teachers they say they're not political. And so it's like, well, if you don't do politics, politics will do you. And with the continued years of cuts, it really stuck. So in 2011, I got involved in a statewide action committee called the Statewide Organizing Task Force through my teachers union, the Oregon Education Association. The teacher members created this task force through a representative assembly to create a stronger infrastructure of member actions by organizing teacher members and other members to action. This committee was comprised of members throughout the state of Oregon. We created buttons, Red for Ed. We created slogans, slogans. We need the schools that our students deserve. We also created days of action. On October 14th, 2015, we had a day of action. We called across the state for teachers and districts to wear Red for Ed, to stand up for school funding. We posted these photos on social media, and that action took off. It was so exciting to see superintendents, school administrators, teachers, students, community members standing up in their red. In 2015, then I became the chair of this statewide organizing task force, and it was during that year that OEA and our Oregon filed for Measure 97. This was a time of great hope, and we had great vision of bringing in revenue and what that could mean to our students. In 2016, we really jumped in to help pass Measure 97. We turned out in large efforts to gather signatures, go door to door, have one-to-one conversations, to canvass, and to educate the public and our community about what was happening in our classrooms. Many didn't know the degree of disrupted learning, the degree of miseducation for students, and how many of our students were in crisis. It was this experience of going door to door to talk to voters that restored my faith that the public respects teachers, despite all the negative press that we've seen for years about those greedy teachers. The only thing the news seems to want to publish is about contract negotiations and talking about greedy teachers. It doesn't talk about the thousands of dollars that teachers spend out of their paychecks to just buy school supplies or to support their students or buy a pair of shoes. So when I did this canvassing, I was so relieved to know that I was respected and that people understood. So it was also a time where, for the first time, teachers stepped out of their classroom. People had never thought that they could talk to others about things such as political nature, like ballot measures, bringing in funding to education. So there was a great outflow. It was the beginning of teachers realizing that our voices count. So when it didn't pass, I was absolutely devastated. Absolutely. And I took it personal. I was like, oh my gosh. You know, we needed it so bad, and then to not have that support from our voters. I went into a dark, deep hole, and it was, I really lost hope. So, fortunately, other people kept the torch going, and over time, it took a little while to realize that Measure 97 was flawed, and that it was flawed in several areas. It was too big of a tax. And actually, the way it was written, 2/3 of the tax would not have gone to education. And it would have gone to other things. So it was too big, too broad, and there were no exemptions for groceries. So in 2017, there continued to be more grassroots effort to keep this pressure on the legislature, the public, and other constituent groups, that this funding crisis needed a resolution that would work, and would work broadly for all people and for businesses. So keeping revenue alive happened in the legislature by continuing lobbying days, by bringing a story of the day. So inside of our teachers union, there were organizers that went around and interviewed teachers, and I was one teacher she interviewed, and as you saw, I cried a little bit earlier because it's, you know, intense and personal to me. So during this interview, I cried with her, and she says, you know, I have not done an interview yet. She probably did 60 prior to me, where a teacher did not cry. So these stories were presented to the legislature, one story a day, and they got their attention. They started really listening and started to really understand what was really happening inside our classroom walls. So disrupted learning conversations were also happening around the state simultaneously as community forums. Class size and caseload state legislation was also brought forth. In 2018, there was a joint committee for student success that was formed. It began in February of 2018 and continued for the rest of the year. This committee pulled together educators, students, parents, business partners, and various other community groups. This joint committee for student success had 14 stops around the state. The public got to hear testimonies from teachers, students, parents, administrators about disrupted learning. People outside of education were really beginning to understand how severe this funding crisis is, and that Oregon needed to invest in our schools to improve graduation rates, to improve attendance, and to just change the conditions of our schools so that our students could learn. Increased funding was needed to address mental health issues, improve safety at schools, decrease class sizes, all of it. Then in 2019, the Red for Ed movement really picked up to exponential levels. We saw records amounts of teachers, families, students, labor partners, and many more supporters of education who turned out to stand up for increased revenue. On February 18th, in Salem, I was standing on the steps of the Capitol and looking out, and it was the biggest sea of red that I've ever seen to date. And that made me so proud to be a part of that movement and to be a part of everyone who chose to come together as a collective unit to demand increased funding. And then on May 8th, 2019, man, thought February 18th was big. That was incredible. So I live in Southern Oregon, and when I saw the pictures of what the waterfront in Portland looked like when there was 25,000 people there, again, just amazing. There was 40,000 people around the state. In Southern Oregon, we're pretty conservative down there, but man, everybody united around education. There were so many actions around the state. 5,000 people in Salem again. So this momentum had just gained so much movement. And then the Student Success Act that Lori talked about, it was an incredible group of people that were involved. The Oregon Education Association, the Confederation of School Administrators, known as COSA, Oregon School Boards, Stand for Children, and the Superintendent of Instruction, Goldkill, got together to shape the Student Investment Account, as well as advocating for elements of the statewide initiatives account. They worked hard on the policy details. A second OEA formed coalition also worked very closely with allies to create the revenue plan that raises the $2 billion per biennium. There was also external coalitions, Invest Oregon, labor groups, faith groups, organizations of communities of color were also involved in making sure that this act had an emphasis on equity. The Student Success Act created a baseline investment in our students with an emphasis on mental and behavioral health, which was a critical piece of the dedicated funds. So this has brought us to the current day. The Student Success Act is passed. For me, it's a dream come true. And my vision of the Student Success Act is to change what my regular week looks like. So I'm an autism consultant now, and I serve 5 different districts, and I go to IEP meetings for students that have autism spectrum disorder. And I sit in these meetings, and there's evidentiary-based practices that shows what students of autism need in order to be successful in the classrooms, to be successful in their communication systems. And I can't advocate for that at the table, because it can't go into an IEP, which is a legal document. There are no resources, there are no people to do that. So instead, I bite my tongue and I get sad. And then I think, next year. Next year, there could be something different, where instead, sitting in those IEP meetings, we can talk about this student needs to get social cognition skills. This student needs to have behavioral training. Let's make sure that they have time in a sensory room. And that there's going to be teams of specialists that are supporting teachers. Teachers can't do the work anymore that they've had to do, be nurses. They have to be the first responders. They have to be the social workers, the parent figures, and also the triage workers to just maintain their classroom. That through the Student Success Act, my dream is that there will be teams of the people who are trained to take care of those behavioral and mental health components. There'll be behavioral specialists, there'll be school counselors, mental health workers, there'll be more of us, autism consultants, so we can actually reach the number of rising students with autism. And teachers can actually do what they're trained to teach, which is to teach education and to form a community within their classroom and to feel supported. So I just can't say enough about how it's been incredible to be a part of this Red for Ed and this dream of increased funding for our students. And I will forever be proud of seeing how powerful teachers can be by leaving their classrooms, becoming political, speaking out, taking action, and creating great change. Thank you.
All right. Colin made me cry. Now I have to focus. All right. So my name is Shannon Foxley, and I'm in my 15th year as a school counselor in the Gresham Barlow School District. And as we were talking last night, I realized I'm actually the baby of this group. I have the least amount of experience. I may not be the youngest, but I'm the newest in education. And what was impactful for me about that is I have never worked in education where we weren't facing a budget cut. I have never faced a time where we weren't working with a deficit mindset. With the passage of the SSA, I'm now looking for the first time in my career at education funding that's putting back in rather than taking away. One of the #1 focuses of the Student Success Act is an increase in mental and behavioral health supports for students. I'm not a real numbers person, but I want to give you a history of some school counselor numbers just to kind of give you an idea of where we've been and hopefully where we can go to. So the American School Counselor Association is the overseeing body that basically trains school counselors in their theories and how they do their jobs. And their recommended ratio is 1 counselor for every 250 students. In 2004, when I started my career, the Oregon rates were 1 to every 453 students. In the 15-16 school year, it was 1 to every 511. We are 41st in the nation in regards to our numbers. So there's only 9 states behind us that have higher numbers than ours. Personally, and this is the numbers that I was talking to someone that they asked me to share with you. So in 2009, we had a very large recession. And we know that when recessions hit, that because school is paid for before the Success Act with the general funds, layoffs happen. You can't cut teachers at the levels that you cut ancillary staff because teachers have to be able to teach. Their class sizes got crazy. School counseling jobs disappeared. In Gresham Barlow, I think it was 32 or 39 full-time that FTE was cut. 18 of that was counseling. It has not been put back in 10 years. In 2012 in Portland Public, when I was 0.5, so I was half-time in 2 schools, I was working with a caseload of almost 800 children. These are children that families, they expect me to know who their kids are, what their families are going on, and I'm lucky if I knew their names because it's too many kids, you can't keep up. So we wonder why there's a crisis in the classrooms. We wonder why disrupted learning is happening. So the Student Success Act requires these supports, these mental health and behavioral health supports to happen. And the reality is it's not an either or, it's both. We need behavior supports, we need mental health supports. Disrupted learning, we've all heard about it, we talked about it, it's been on the news. And the reality is, and I'm going to talk somewhat from my perspective as an elementary school counselor, kids are coming into school not ready to learn. We don't have early childhood education, so we call them couch to kinders. They come off their couches at home and head into kindergarten. They've never been away from their parents. They maybe have never sat in a classroom. The other challenge that we're seeing is, think about, and you can walk around and see it, how parents are parenting children. This is not a diss on parents, it's what's happening. A kid gets upset and the parent does what? Hands on the phone. Says here. And the kid looks at the phone. So what's happening is our babies are coming in having not learned how to self-soothe. They have not learned how to help themselves when they're dysregulated. What they learn is when something's boring or hard, I'm gonna get something that's gonna stimulate my brain that maybe isn't teaching me anything, but then I'm not bored anymore. And they don't know how to be bored. I have kids that tell me I'm bored, and I'm like, oh, okay, we all get bored. And they don't know how to calm themselves down. But then the next piece that happens is, we're talking about 5 and 6-year-olds. They don't have impulse control. I mean, that's just the reality of who they are. They're little kids. And also, kindergarten isn't go in, sit down, learn how to play now. They're having to learn to read and write. The expectations now are the same that 2nd graders had 10 years ago. So it's not just play-based, you learn how to be a student first. They walk in needing to know how to be students. And I've got children, I'm in a high poverty school, that don't know how to regulate themselves. So then we have this what we call disrupted learning. Kids are running out of the classrooms. They're destroying classrooms. They're, hitting their classmates. And what happens is by the time they get to 3rd grade, where the education shift is changed from learning to read, to reading to learn, they don't know how to read. And so now, they know they can't read. They have these lagging skills, and we're surprised that they're not now coming to school, that anxiety rates are off the charts. I have kids who missed 50% of the school year last year because they were scared to come to school. I have one boy, and we've worked with his family, his anxiety was so huge. We finally got him coming to school. He started in 2nd grade not knowing how to write his name. He ended 3rd grade reading at benchmark level because he came to school. I'm very blessed that my school has behavior supports that not other schools have. So I kind of wrote down 3 things that I look at that are really important that we need as we're looking at these mental health supports. The first one is increasing the number of licensed school counselors. 1 to 511, it's not enough, especially in our high poverty schools. We need to weight it with our mental health supports with school need. We need to weight our mental health supports with what the children need based on needs assessments and what we're seeing. The second one, especially with like what Colleen said, is we need to increase trained education assistants in schools, especially in elementary, to support the teachers to help with the behavioral interventions. They can be professional, they can be classified, they can be anyone. They have to have the training though. It can't just be someone brought in to try to deal with kids who are dealing with dysregulation, because there's a lot of things going on. And the third one is lower class sizes. We know relationships are the answer. I'm sure every single person in this room at some point in time in their schooling had a teacher, a principal, a coach, a custodian, a secretary, somebody who saw them and knew who they were. And I'm the total, I don't do the numbers, but I do the neuropsych. I'm going down, like, they'll be like, oh no, it's going down the rabbit hole. Because to me, there's so much research coming out around how our brains form, and especially in those formative years. And the one thing that always sticks out to me is there's one thing that can help a child's cortisol level drop down. Cortisol is a stress hormone. There's one thing, and that's oxytocin. And oxytocin is the relationship hormone. When you have a connection to a child, they have a safe person to go to help themselves regulate. When you are a high school student and you are having suicidal ideation and you know that your counselor has time to talk to you and not spending their entire day putting schedules in, we're going to reduce the risk of suicide. We have to have more educated, trained people in our schools. We have to stop asking teachers to be therapists. My teachers come to me all the time and they're like, I don't know what to do, I'm not a counselor. And I help them as much as I can, but I'm one person in a school of 400. So when children are seen and heard, we can teach them their lagging skills. When we're looking at our kindergartners, our first graders, our second graders, by having the increased behavioral health supports in the buildings, we are going to be able to teach our kids how to regulate themselves. And Elizabeth and I were she's a child development specialist, we both do similar work. We were laughing because I can't do my job in my elementary school if I don't have behavioral health supports. So I can't, because I have to go and help with our kids that are dysregulated. If behavior is not addressed, I can't do my job. If mental health is not addressed at the high school level, the high school teachers can't do their jobs. If you'll start seeing it, we don't have the road clears in middle school like we have in elementary school, because most middle schoolers hopefully aren't going to flip their lids hard enough to destroy their classroom, and when it does happen, it's a really big deal and usually ends up in expulsion. The other thing, I was talking to the executive director of Resolutions Northwest in Portland, and what she was telling me is one of the other ways that communities are now accessing mental health is they're going through the juvenile justice system, because they can access mental health faster than I can access it for my students. So I wanted to tell you a story because this is kind of the reality of my life, and it just kind of talks about why we need this. I have 2 amazing kindergartners. I love these boys. They are the funniest, most energetic, naughtiest little boys I've ever worked with, because they're 5 and they've never been to school, and you can watch them, and they both are coming from pretty intensive trauma, and you can watch them start to run each other, like, ooh, let's go run, let's go, and you can't just say stop, because they don't understand that. And so on Wednesday, I had my radio off. I missed it all, but I heard all about it. They saw a hole in the fence during recess and decided to see what was on the other side of the fence. So they went through the fence, and behind the fence is a field, and the ambulance track, and the helicopter pad, and the hospital. We had 2 5-year-olds and 6 adults trying to get them back. So that's 6 adults who could have been working with other kids trying to get them back, because they didn't know how to stop. And the difference in the mental health supports and behavior supports in elementary versus high school is, in elementary, when we're looking at kids who are dysregulated, kids who are coming from trauma, we're sending them home every day to their trauma systems. So elementary school children need the behavior supports to help them teach those lagging skills, those self-soothing skills, so that they can access their education. As we get older, especially middle school, high school, they now have the self-awareness. They can go to a counselor, they can go to a therapist, and start talking about maybe what their struggles in life are. That if our counselors are so busy building schedules, doing credit checks, they don't have time to support our kids, and we're gonna see these increases, these suicides increase, which is why the Student Success Act, for the first time in a long time, there's a lot of hope. There's hope that we are going to be able to bring in the supports to our kids so that they can learn, that they are going to school, so that they can graduate. And really, for me, it's about, we're testing our kids to death, and there's a lot. I mean, it's reading, writing, math, and for me, it's also creating more time in the day to be raising whole children, giving the teachers the time to do the social emotional learning that we've lost, so that teachers can help kids learn how to sit still, learn how to, what do I do when I'm angry? What do I do when I'm sad? So for me, the Student Success Act is this bright beacon of hope that we're gonna bring the people in who are gonna be able to give the behavioral and mental health supports so that every kid comes in with a fighting chance. What am I gonna do?
Oh boy, which way forward is it? Oh yay, okay, right arrow.
Okay.
Cool. So whenever I turn a page,
Okay.
that's your cue. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Ball, and I'm a child development specialist in Hillsboro, Oregon. And I'm really happy to be here with you today. Thanks for coming. So as you know, you wouldn't be here this weekend if you didn't know this, but real life problems are complex. And our reality as educators is if we don't start telling you the truth, we're never going to get to the bottom of them. And our truth is that in the last 20 years, educators have been asked to do more and more with less and less resources. Both the state and our districts have asked us to teach a wider range of abilities with more students in the room. While being asked to do more, our families cannot count on cost of living increases because we remain at the whim of the economy and other people's priorities. So here we are being asked to pay for cultural and economic problems out of our own pockets. This is our current reality in the classrooms. And some of these are good things. We have a more diverse student body. That's a good thing. We have more students with disabilities in regular ed classrooms. That can be a very good thing. We have more students diagnosed and undiagnosed with mental health needs, with spoken and unspoken trauma, and many more students. For my very first year, I have 20% of my kindergartners, 60 kindergartners, 20% of them are exhibiting physical aggression and disruptive behaviors, and this is happening statewide. And all at the same time, we have more subjects to teach. Right now in Hillsborough, they're implementing a new health and sexuality curriculum. You can imagine some of the school board meetings that we're going to these days. But, right, so teach more to a more diverse group of students who are, some of whom are struggling. And we're gonna pack in 30 plus 5-year-olds, 60 kids in a science class. I've heard larger than 60 for an art or a physical ed class in high schools. This is our daily reality, and we aren't able to meet the needs of our students anymore. For many years, we thought if we said that out loud, that would mean you wouldn't support us and you wouldn't believe in us. It's now so bad, we can do nothing but tell you the truth. It is this bad. We can't do our jobs. And so, OEA, and that included my local in Hillsborough, decided it was time to start organizing in a very different manner. This right here is what I would like a headline to be for a change, right? Educators show up anyway. I am so proud of my staff. They're amazing. So in September, a group of our organizing committee got together. In the past, we would get together during times of crisis. And this is a time of crisis, so there we were, about 10 of us in a room. And we decided, in order to get to the May 8th date, that we need to start with our internal organizing. So we spent about 6 months, which included both small weekly and monthly activities with our own members. Faced with the reality to be doing more with less, my own staff, like every building across the state, included members who felt incredibly discouraged, sad, and angry. It's important to note, in a profession with a majority of women, tears can mean rage. And I would see people crying at the copier. It was time to do something. And so we started with those small actions, unifying and empowering our own members to start with. And this photo here is significant because it is my staff. It includes my principal, it includes our classified staff, and it includes our licensed staff. So truly, we as a building, although they're not all OEA members, we came together to say, this is important. And if nothing else, we're gonna be a group that's unified and speaks in one voice. So the good news in the middle of this is that when things are really bad, who are the organizers out there? It's easier to organize, right? So it's really bad, right? You have a day or two like this, and you're actually ready to take a sign out on the corner for a change, which somebody else mentioned, maybe Celine. It's hard to get teachers to do, in particular. Our classified members as well. They don't want to be political. But when this is what your workplace looks like, maybe it's time. Additionally, some more good news is that KGW presented the Classrooms in Crisis series, which was incredibly well timed to help us get our message out. And we know that it's those water cooler conversations that took place at Fred Meyer and Intel and Winco or Walmart or wherever you were in the state that help us in the end. So that was incredibly valuable. After about 6 months, Hillsborough was ready, along with other locals in the state, to take our message to the road literally. And so if you drove I-5 or Highway 26 on March 13th of 2019, you noticed, during rush hour, that is, in the evening, you noticed that we had employees. These were primarily school employees on this date. But there we were in our groups with our signs reminding people that it would be nice to have a nurse or to have a counselor in our buildings, and that class size counts. The following month, Hillsborough, again, along with local districts, so we had folks from Gaston, Banks, and Forest Grove come to Hillsborough, get on the MAX with us, and as we came in, the cars would get more and more packed because Beaverton joined us. We had folks from the east side coming in from Gresham.
All within the Gresham line, and it was the same thing all the way in.
Yeah. So we met up in Pioneer Courthouse Square, and once again, the media was there. It helped our community dialogue and also helped with continuing to build our unity, to see that it's not just my Title I school in Hillsborough, but my colleague in Gresham is experiencing the same thing, and that we're all willing to share our voice for our students. Just 1 month later, we went from having just our staff to our staff and maybe their closest family members there at Pioneer Courthouse Square. That most of the children that were there might have been our own. But May 8th, districts in small and large places all over the state, educators showed up alongside parents and community members, and that was an incredibly important and powerful moment. John mentioned one of the small locals. What are a couple of names where people sent you photos?
Union, Nissa, Hermiston.
Right, Union, Nissa, Hermiston, not the hotbed of political activity. And you might see, 4 or 6 or 12 people with a sign, but that was the whole building. Like the whole school had shown up. So to me, those pictures were as meaningful as this picture in Hillsborough. We took 3. We had 3 rounds of people coming in before they got on the mass. They were as powerful. It meant their community was standing up. And for me to be taking this photo with my parents there and community members, Mayor Steve Calloway, former principal, jumped in the photo, was just a really important moment, and I think a very hopeful moment, because it wasn't just us anymore. Someone mentioned, Shannon or someone, about the moment when Lily Eskelson Garcia announced we've reached 25,000. And when I first got there, like, John, how many are there? How many? It's like, well, they're saying it's over 10, it's over 10. And in my head, I wasn't saying it out loud because I didn't want to be negative. I'm like, shit, that's not enough. We need more. We need more. Because I'm thinking people need to understand it's not just a teacher thing. It's not just a bus driver thing. It's not just a principal thing. It's a community thing. Education is about our community and the community we want. So it was very exciting. Once in a while I check in again. Okay, we're past 15,000, we're past 20,000. But it wasn't until Lily got up on stage that I knew we'd passed 25, and that was a wonderful moment. A few days later, the Student Success Act passed, and we really were and continue to be so appreciative of our communities for stepping out and standing with us, as well as the legislators who cared enough about our students to start to close the fiscal discrepancy that Lori was talking about. We genuinely are excited about it. I point out that we've started to close it, because I think she said 94%, right? So we're not 100%. I'm a 100% kind of person myself, but I'm happy that we're going to be a lot better off than we were before. So a very critical decision in Hillsborough that we made back in September with our organizing committee was that we were going to stop only doing it during the crisis. And so the Student Success Act had passed. However, we did not stop the organizing. And one of the most fun organizing things I've done in my life was spending the summer at Hillsborough's Book Swap and Adopt booth. It's something we've done for 5 or 6 years now, where we want to make sure kids in our community have access to books, even though it's summer. What we did was we also handed out surveys to the community at that same booth and asked them how would they like us to be spending the Student Success Act money. Because of wonderful staffers like Lori, we knew that the state was going to be asking us how our community wanted to be spending that money. And so we got a head start in collecting that information, and it led to really rich, powerful conversations with people who care about schools, care about students. Many were parents, but not all. It was incredibly moving to see how many people out there who are older, who genuinely care. Some of them had grandchildren, but even those who didn't still cared about what was happening in the local schools. So at the end of the summer, we had a meeting which was very new for our group. We asked all those community members who took a survey if they would like to join us, and we shared our results for the survey, and we had community members, not OEA members, present on the subjects of interest. So, as you might imagine, lowering class size, especially kindergarten through 2nd grade, when our students are dysregulated and need the most one-on-one support is a priority. And we had a community member who talked about that. Our community is also deeply worried about the increasing numbers of students with mental health concerns. And yes, those are those students in crisis that were in the KGW series. But I want to point out that we have increasing number of students who do not disrupt classrooms, but who struggle to stay engaged in school and are at risk for not graduating because of trauma. They're not acting out, they're acting in. And they are sitting in those same classrooms and deserve as much attention as those that are acting out. The third thing that our community talked about wanting is to add back things like librarians, art, nurses, music, more PE, some of the things that they might have remembered from their own childhood as a reason to go to school, or that they enjoy in life as an adult, and that it makes you a rich and fulfilled person. So I'd like to show you some of the Red for Ed work in action through this video.
Red for Ed means getting not just educators who care about kids every day, but it means getting the community, our legislators and other elected officials involved in advocating publicly for education.
I think that's part of what we have to do, is make sure that our friends, our families, our colleagues, they are aware that when we're talking about Red for Ed, we're talking about investing in public schools, we're talking about investing in our students.
Because we believe that every student deserves a great school, and together we can ensure that that happens.
Think about a child you adore, some child that you love with every fiber of your being. Think about the kind of school, the kind of education you want for that child. That's the kind of education every blessed child deserves. And I'm going to fight for every student to get the very same thing.
that student in your mind today and in the future when you hear about our efforts in your own community. I'm really grateful to be part of a union that's ready to work with our community. It's time. And in particular, I appreciate each of you for your curiosity and your willingness to take some time with us today. Thank you so much.
We do have just a couple minutes left. We kind of went a little over, I think, but if you have any particular questions that you'd like to ask any of the members of our panel, we can take those now.
Hi, my name is Megan. I am a parent of two future Beaverton School District students. So what can we do as parents, as community members now to help continue to support you and give feedback and shape how the Student Success Act comes to life in our communities?
Thanks for asking. So every district across Oregon has to participate in community engagement efforts. So that means that they need to have these public forums where community members, parents, students, employees all weigh in on what they want for the Student Success Act. So check with the Beaverton School District and find out when they're holding them, and Elizabeth will know a little bit more about that. But for everybody, just know that you're all part of the community. And across Oregon, find out when those community engagements are happening. Show up, make sure you share with your voices exactly what you want your taxpayer dollars and this student success money to go towards in terms of programmings. And if they're not happening, ask why not, because it's part of the law and they have to have it. And school boards need to document that they took in the stakeholder voices.
So BEA has the same sort of committee that HEA does. And so what I would encourage you to do is to help participate on their community committee, regardless of what district you're in, including NISA and Bly. You might ask, who's your union building rep? And you might say to them, hey, I'd be happy to support you if anything's going on, let me know. Definitely still consider communicating with the district, but I might consider doing both. Other questions? Okay.
Well, let me just shout. So each district decides how they're going to use this allotted money. So definitely input into that district is necessary. Okay.
Yes.
That's right, and the way you can find out, every district has their community engagement processes on their district website, so you can look there, and then
Or
also.
they should.
Well, they're supposed to, and then there's also our union locals also have a lot of these engagement organization things. I know Beaverton has one that's called Let's Talk About Beaverton, and Portland has been doing their engagement. There have been a number of others that have done with greater or lesser fidelity to the intent of the law, some survey work and outreach to the community. I think that the fidelity happens when the community demands it.
Right, exactly.
Thank you all so much for your time. Really appreciate your attention.
Thank you.